Get this trash off my range. Sergeant Cole grabbed her rifle by the barrel and threw it across the supply room floor. The weapon skidded hard into the concrete wall. Every recruit in the room froze. She walked over, picked it up, checked the action without looking at him. "I'm requesting the black Talon," she said. Cole's face split into a grin. He turned to the room with both arms out wide. "She wants the black Talon, boys." The laughter hit like a wave. Nobody in that room knew her real name. Nobody knew her file was locked behind 3 levels of military clearance. Nobody knew the black Talon had been built specifically for her. Subscribe and drop your city below. I want to see how far this story reaches. She had driven 14 hours to get to Redstone Advanced Combat Training Center, and she arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late, exactly on time. The kind of precision that doesn't happen by accident. Captain Emily Carter pulled into the main gate in a 10-year-old civilian pickup truck, the kind with sun-bleached paint and a cracked side mirror held together with electrical tape. She wore no unit patch on her jacket. She carried no visible credentials on a lanyard. She had a single canvas bag slung over one shoulder, and when the gate guard asked her for identification, she handed him a laminated card that looked so plain, so ordinary, that he almost handed it back without reading it. He read it, then he read it again. He picked up his radio and said nothing for a full 3 seconds. "Ma'am," he finally said, "you're cleared. Go straight ahead." She nodded once and drove through. Nobody at the gate said another word, but the guard stood watching her truck until it disappeared around the corner. Something about the card had changed the quality of the air around him. He couldn't explain it. He just knew he wouldn't be talking about what he'd seen on it. Emily Park grabbed her bag and walked toward the main complex. Around her, the training center was already in full morning motion. Groups of recruits ran in formation across a long central field. Instructors barked commands at the edges of the track. Equipment carriers rolled between buildings. The sounds of Redstone were hard and consistent, the way a machine sounds when every part is working at the same time. She walked through it like she wasn't there. Not slowly, not quickly, just steadily, with the particular kind of forward movement that people develop after years of walking through places where hesitation gets you killed. Her eyes weren't looking at the buildings, they were cataloging them. The exits on the north building, the camera positions above the armory, the gap in the fence line near the equipment yard. She noted all of it without turning her head. A group of recruits jogged past her, and one of them, a wide-shouldered young man named Private Holloway, looked back over his shoulder with the easy contempt of someone who had just decided at a glance that she wasn't worth paying attention to. She was short. She was lean in the way that looks slight until someone who knows what to look for checks the forearms. Her boots were old. Her jacket was faded. She didn't have the look of someone who belonged at Redstone, which was a place built to attract people who looked the part. Holloway said something to the man running next to him, and they both laughed. She didn't hear what he said. She wasn't listening. She was already calculating the load-bearing capacity of the roof above the armory based on the angle of the support beams she'd spotted through the windows. The weapons supply station was a long rectangular room with fluorescent lighting and the kind of institutional beige walls that the military used everywhere to remind soldiers they were no longer individuals. Behind the main counter stood Sergeant First Class Derek Cole, a man who had been running that station for 6 years and who had developed during those 6 years a comprehensive theory about exactly who belonged at Redstone and who did not. Emily walked in, set her bag on the floor, and stepped up to the counter. Cole didn't look up from his clipboard immediately. He let her stand there the way supply sergeants sometimes did with soldiers they hadn't decided to respect yet. It was a small test. The soldiers who shuffled their feet or cleared their throats or said, "Excuse me," were the ones who needed to be reminded where they stood. He finished his notation, capped his pen, and finally looked up. "Transfer paperwork," he said. She placed a document set on the counter. He opened it without expression. He read the first page, then the second. His expression remained flat, but something shifted in his posture. The paperwork was real, properly formatted, and signed at a level that was slightly above what he normally saw. He glanced at her once, then back at the documents. "What unit are you coming from?" "The paperwork covers it," she said. He didn't like that answer. "I'm asking you directly, Captain." "I understand that." He set the paperwork down. He'd dealt with difficult transfers before. Some people thought classification made them more important than the supply process. They were always wrong. What are you requesting today? Standard field kit, she said, sidearm, tactical vest, and the black Talon. The pen in his hand stopped moving. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time the way people look at someone when they're trying to figure out if they're joking. I'm sorry, what was that last one? The black Talon, she repeated. Her voice was completely level, no performance in it, no dramatic weight. She said it the way you'd request a medium coffee, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Cole stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned his head toward the two soldiers working behind him at the equipment racks and said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "You all hearing this?" The men turned around. Cole faced her again. "Lady, that weapon is not part of any active inventory. It is not part of any training program. If it even exists, which I'm not saying it does, it is not something you walk up to a counter and request on a Tuesday morning." "I understand," she said. "If you don't have it available, I'll take the standard issue." "You understand?" He repeated it slowly, the way people repeat things when they think you don't actually understand. "The black Talon. Right, sure, let me check my magic cabinet." He said it loud enough that both of his men laughed. A recruit who had been filling out forms near the door laughed. Someone in the back of the room laughed. The sound filled the space. Emily looked at Cole steadily. She did not smile. She did not look embarrassed. She did not look angry. She stood with the kind of stillness that some people have, the kind that comes from having been in places where showing any emotion at all would have cost them everything. She waited for the room to finish. When it quieted, she said, "The standard issue is fine." Cole slid a rifle across the counter with more force than was necessary. She accepted it, checked the action, checked the sights, checked the load chamber, and slung it over her shoulder in one continuous motion that took less than 4 seconds. Cole had watched thousands of soldiers handle weapons at that counter. He had never seen anyone do that particular check sequence in exactly that order, at exactly that speed. It was the sequence that special operations soldiers used, the kind they drilled into you until it was automatic, the kind you could do in the dark. He opened his mouth, closed it. She had already picked up her bag and was walking out the door. The man they called Mitchell owned Redstone in the way that certain people own rooms without being assigned to them. He was tall, broad, and built for the kind of appearance that made new recruits uncertain whether to talk to him or get out of his way. Sergeant First Class Ryan Mitchell had broken the base qualification record 2 years running. His accuracy scores were posted on the board in the training hall with a red circle around them. He had a way of standing on the shooting range that suggested he wasn't practicing. He was reminding the rifle who was in charge. He first noticed Emily Carter at Chow. She sat alone at the end of a long table with a tray and a folder of what looked like terrain maps. She was eating without looking at her food, her eyes moving across the pages with the particular focus of someone memorizing something, not reading it. Mitchell sat down across from her without being invited, which was something he did often enough that he no longer thought of it as rude. "You're the one who asked Cole for the black Talon," he said. She looked up. "Yes, that was you." "Yes." He waited for more. Nothing came. "You know half the base is talking about that." "I heard." "So you know how it looked?" She considered the question with what seemed like genuine thought. "I know how it looked to people who haven't seen one." Mitchell put his fork down. He'd expected embarrassment or defensiveness. He'd gotten neither. He wasn't sure how to process her response, so he switched angles. "Where'd you come from? Your file's pretty thin for someone your rank." "Files often are," she said. "That's not really an answer." "No," she agreed, "it's not." He sat with that for a moment. "Then shooting quals are tomorrow. You planning to run the course?" "Yes." "Standard distance starts at 300, then 450, then 600. The top score right now is mine, has been for 2 years. He said it without vanity, just fact. "I saw the board," she said. "Any questions about the course layout?" She flipped a page in her terrain folder. "No." He picked up his fork again. He'd come over to assess her, and he was leaving less certain than when he sat down. That didn't happen to him often. He didn't like it. "I'll see you on the range," he said. "You will," she said. He left. She turned the page. The next morning arrived with the desert's particular brand of cruelty, a sky that looked almost cold at 6 a.m. and would be pressing 100 degrees by noon. Soldiers gathered at the range before the sun was fully up. There were 43 active shooters scheduled for the qualification round. Mitchell arrived early and worked his shoulders in the careful way of someone who treated their body like a precision instrument. He saw Emily arrive at the edge of the group and find a position near the far end of the line. She didn't stretch. She didn't adjust her gear. She stood and watched the range crew set the targets, and she did it with the kind of absolute concentration that made Mitchell look at her again, without meaning to. The range officer, Lieutenant Gaines, called the group together. Standard qualification starts at 300 meters. You will fire 10 rounds from prone, then we move to 450, then 600. Top scores will be noted for the advanced course selection. Questions at no hands, first rotation, positions. Emily took her prone position at station 15. The soldier on her left glanced over and immediately nudged the soldier next to him. They exchanged a look. She was using the standard issue rifle they'd issued her at the supply station, not the preferred option that most experienced shooters at Redstone requested. The one most of them had quietly upgraded with at least one approved modification. She had nothing on hers. No scope upgrade, no grip adjustment, nothing. Private Holloway, who had laughed at her in the yard the day before, leaned over to the man next to him and said quietly, "$20 says she doesn't make the minimum." "Easy money," the man replied. Gaines gave the command. Emily fired. Her shot grouping at 300 meters was tight enough that Gaines walked down to look at it personally. He stood at the target for a moment, walked back, said nothing. They moved to 450 meters. Her grouping tightened. This created a specific kind of silence on the range, not the silence of nothing happening, the silence of 42 people simultaneously revising their understanding of something. Mitchell watched from position 7. He had excellent scores at 450. He knew what excellent looked like at this distance. He knew what he was watching from her position was not excellent by standard measure. It was something above that. It was the kind of performance that didn't have a word on a score sheet. He recalibrated his breath control and fired his own rounds. They were superb. He knew they were superb. He looked over at her target. He looked back at his own. He said nothing. They moved to 600 meters. At 600 meters, the air over the Arizona desert moves in ways that most trained shooters can compensate for usually. Wind at the surface reads differently than wind at elevation. Temperature differentials over the target distance create shimmer variations. Professional shooters spent years learning to read these changes through a scope. Emily was not using a scope. Gaines called for the 600-meter round, and something strange happened among the soldiers on the line. Without being asked, without any conversation, they began watching her instead of their own preparation. Holloway forgot about his $20. The man he'd bet looked at Emily's position, then at his own weapon, then back at her. She settled into position, completely still. The kind of stillness that has nothing performative in it, not the stillness of someone trying to look calm, the stillness of someone who had moved so far past nervousness on a range that it wasn't even a memory. She fired, then again, 10 rounds. When the range crew called the scores, Gaines read the numbers off the tablet with the flat face of a man who had learned never to visibly react to anything on a military range. He read through the roster. He read Mitchell's score. Then he read Station 15. The soldier next to Holloway said slowly and with great precision, "What?" It wasn't a question. Mitchell's score was the best he'd ever posted. It was the kind of score that would normally put his red circle back on the board without argument. He stood there knowing he had shot brilliantly and not at all certain it would matter. He was correct. Her score was 4 points above his. Nobody laughed. Gaines set down the tablet and looked at Emily where she was clearing her weapon at Station 15. He had been running qualification courses at Redstone for 9 years. He had a very complete picture of what elite performance looked like. He had never put 4 points above Mitchell's best day into his records before. He said quietly and not to anyone in particular, "Who exactly is this woman?" The questions started moving through Redstone the way questions move through closed military environments, quietly between people who don't usually share information, gathering detail and urgency as it passed from person to person. By evening, everyone on base had some version of the story, most of them wrong in the details, but right in the general shape. A woman nobody knew had walked in from nowhere. She had asked for a weapon that wasn't supposed to exist. She had shot better than Ryan Mitchell. These three facts combined in the imagination of a military base in ways that produced something close to unease. Because the soldiers at Redstone were not naive. They knew that when someone appeared with a thin file and exceptional skills and equipment requests that belonged to programs nobody talked about, it meant something. It meant they were standing next to something that operated at a level they hadn't seen before. It made people say things they wouldn't normally say out loud. In the officers' mess that evening, a junior lieutenant named Price asked Gaines directly, "What do you actually know about her orders?" "What's in the transfer package?" Gaines said, "which is enough to clear her through the gate." "And what unit?" Gaines picked up his coffee. "The paperwork covers it." Price recognized those words. He'd heard them from her himself in the supply station doorway. He sat back in his chair and looked at his food without eating it. She said the exact same thing. "Yes," said Gaines, "that doesn't bother you." "A lot of things bother me," said Gaines. "That particular thing tells me to be careful about what questions I ask." Across the mess hall, Mitchell sat with two of his senior soldiers and said nothing for a long stretch of time before one of them, Corporal Ayers, asked what was clearly the question they were all holding. "You going to say something? Request a rematch, formal challenge?" Mitchell looked at his food. "No." "Why not?" "Because he said she wasn't trying. You understand what I'm saying to you. She was not trying." Ayers considered this. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen what trying looks like at that level," Mitchell said. "I know what maximum effort produces in a shooter. Every tell, the jaw, the shoulder, the breath before the release. She had none of it. She shot at 600 meters with a standard issue rifle and no scope, like she was shooting at 200 with her favorite weapon on a calm day." He paused. "Which means she has a ceiling I haven't seen yet." The table was quiet. "So no," Mitchell said, "I'm not going to request a rematch." She was in the planning room at 2200 hours alone with a set of topographical maps that nobody had issued to her spread across the table, in an arrangement that Gaines, who appeared in the doorway to get a file from the adjacent cabinet, recognized immediately as an operational grid pattern. The kind used for coordinated deployment analysis, not training planning. Operational planning. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "You're not interrupting." He glanced at the maps. "Those aren't from our standard training inventory." "No," she said, "they're mine." "May I ask what you're working on?" She looked at him for a moment with those steady eyes that seemed to be evaluating something behind whatever you were visibly doing. "Terrain familiarization," she said. It was not a lie. It was not the full truth. It was the kind of answer that told him exactly where the line was. He nodded, opened the cabinet, retrieved his file. "Captain Carter," he said at the door. She looked up again. "What you did on that range today? I've been here 9 years. He stopped, started again. "I want you to know that I saw it clearly, what it actually was." She held his eyes. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said. He left. She looked back at her maps. Her hand moved across the terrain lines with the familiarity of someone tracing a place she'd been before, the crease in the paper where she'd folded it too many times. The small pencil marks at particular elevation points that only someone who'd been there would know to make. She looked at the map for a long time. Then she folded it carefully, put it in her jacket, and went to find somewhere to sleep. Outside, the desert was completely dark and completely quiet. Inside the base, people were still asking questions about her. She had stopped worrying about other people's questions a very long time ago. What mattered now was the mission they hadn't briefed yet. The one she already knew was coming. The one that had actually been why she was here all along. Not to train anyone, not to qualify on a range, not to sit through briefings with officers who filed her paperwork without reading what was actually in it. She had come back to Redstone for a specific reason. And nobody at this base, not Gaines, not Mitchell, not Cole, who had laughed at her in the supply room, had any idea yet what that reason was. But they would. She would make certain they understood, not for herself, not for the record, and not for the red circle on the qualification board. For something larger, something that had been building for years in the silence she had been living inside. The kind of thing that could only be finished by the person who started it. And she had started it in a country whose name she was still not permitted to say out loud. The score stayed on the board for exactly 6 hours before someone took it down. Not because anyone ordered it removed. Because the range officer who had posted it, a detail-oriented corporal named Briggs, came back the next morning, to laminate the weekly results sheet and realized he had written her name wrong. He had written Carter E. the way he wrote every other name. But when he looked at the number next to it, he stopped, set his laminator down, looked at it again. Then he wrote it correctly, pressed it flat, and posted it where Mitchell's red circle had lived unchallenged for 2 years. Mitchell saw it at 0600 during his morning walk to the equipment bay. He stopped in front of the board for 4 seconds. Then he kept walking. He didn't say anything to anyone. But Corporal Ayers, who had been walking 2 steps behind him, watched his jaw do something complicated and stored that information away. Emily had already been up for 2 hours. She ran the perimeter of the base at a pace that most soldiers would have described as uncomfortably fast for someone who didn't need to prove anything. She ran it alone without headphones, without a watch, without the particular performance that some soldiers put into early morning PT when they know they might be observed. She ran like she was thinking, like movement was the only state in which her mind operated at the speed it wanted to go. When she came back through the east entrance, sweating and breathing hard, and already somewhere else in her head, she nearly walked directly into Lieutenant Gaines. He was standing outside the planning building with a coffee mug and the look of a man who had been waiting without wanting to appear like he was waiting. "Captain Carter," he said. She stopped. "Lieutenant, you mind walking with me for a minute?" She fell into step beside him. They moved along the edge of the equipment yard away from the main flow of morning activity. "I got a call last night," Gaines said, "from someone above my pay grade." "Okay," she said. "They asked about your performance on the range. I told them the scores. And they said thank you and hung up." He paused. "That's not a normal call, Captain. People above my pay grade don't usually call about qualification scores." "No," she agreed, "they don't." He stopped walking. "Is there something I should know about why you're here? Because the transfer paperwork clears you, but the transfer paperwork doesn't explain the call I got last night, and it doesn't explain what you did at 600 meters with a stock rifle, and it doesn't explain why you asked Cole for something that a supply sergeant at a training center has absolutely no reason to have." Emily looked at him for a moment. I was a careful man. She respected careful men. "There's nothing I'm able to tell you right now," she said, "but there's nothing you need to worry about. Those two things aren't the same thing." "No," she said, "they're not." He studied her face the way people study the weather, looking for what's moving underneath. "You're going to ask me to trust something I can't verify." "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "But yes." He looked away, looked back. "All right." He picked up his coffee. "Briefing at 0800. General Caldwell wants the senior training staff together. You're included." She nodded. "I'll be there." He started to go, then turned back. "Carter, whatever it is you're here to do." He paused like he was deciding whether to finish the sentence. "Don't let them make it harder than it needs to be." She looked at him. "They always do," she said. He didn't argue with that. Minute's audience retention hook. General Nathan Caldwell ran his briefings the way he ran everything, with the economy of a man who considered wasted words a form of disrespect. He was 61 years old, had more operational deployments behind him than most people in the room would ever accumulate, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough rooms where bad things happen that he no longer felt the need to fill silence with noise. He stood at the front of the briefing room with a mug of black coffee and looked at the assembled training staff, and when Emily walked in 3 minutes before the hour and took the last open seat at the far end of the table, he looked at her in a way that was different from how he looked at everyone else. Not longer, not softer, different, like he was confirming something. He began. "I've reviewed yesterday's qualification results." He didn't look at his notes. He never looked at his notes. "The scores are on the board. I want to address something directly because I don't want rumors filling in what I can tell you myself." The room adjusted. 12 people around the table, all of them reading the air. "We have a new staff member whose transfer orders are coming through channels that some of you may not have clearance to access. That is not unusual for this facility. What is unusual is the performance gap some of you witnessed on the range, and I want to be clear about how I expect that to be handled." He set his mug down. "It will be handled with professionalism. Anyone who has questions about Captain Carter's presence here brings them to me directly. Not to each other, not to their soldiers, to me." Cole, who had apparently decided he was important enough to be included in a senior staff briefing, sat 3 seats down from Emily and said nothing. But the line of his shoulders said several things. Gaines across the table kept his eyes on the general. Mitchell was not in the room. He hadn't been included, which was a decision the general had made deliberately, and which Mitchell would learn about secondhand in a way that would cost him several hours of sleep. Caldwell looked around the table. Questions. A major named Doyle, who ran the advanced tactics section, raised his hand partially. Sir, the Black Talon request that came through the supply station yesterday. Caldwell looked at him. Is that something that's going to require us to clear additional storage protocols? That's something that's being handled, Caldwell said. By me. Doyle lowered his hand. Cole shifted in his chair. Emily looked at the table. The briefing moved on to training schedules and evaluation rotations and the other administrative architecture of a military base in full operation. And Emily sat through all of it with her hands folded and her attention complete and nothing visible on her face about what she was actually thinking, which was that the general had just sent 3 specific signals in the last 4 minutes. And all 3 of them told her that what she had come to Redstone to do was moving faster than she'd expected. Budasum. Mini climax 10 minutes. Cole caught her in the corridor after the briefing ended. He didn't grab her. He wasn't stupid enough for that. He just moved to put himself in her path in the way that certain men do when they want to communicate that they control the space they're standing in. That was quite a show yesterday, he said. On the range. She stopped. Looked at him. Thank you, she said. I'm not complimenting you. I know. He stepped slightly closer. Not enough to constitute a physical threat. Enough to constitute a message. I've been running that supply station for 6 years. I know what's in every cabinet, every inventory log, every equipment manifest on this base. And I know what's not. He paused. The weapon you asked for, there's no record of it anywhere in our system. That's correct, she said. Then what made you think you could walk in here and ask for it like it was a standard sidearm? She looked at him steadily. Cole was a big man. He was used to his size doing conversational work for him. It wasn't doing anything useful right now. Because I've used one, she said. You've used one. Several times. In what capacity? She tilted her head slightly. The paperwork covers it. The muscle in his jaw moved. He recognized his own dismissal being returned to him. I'm going to find out who you are, he said. It came out quieter than he intended, which made it sound more serious than a shout would have. You're welcome to try, she said, but I'd start with your clearance level and work backward from there. She walked past him. He stood in the corridor for a moment with the specific feeling of a man who has just lost a confrontation he didn't realize he was in until it was over. Mitchell was waiting at the range when she arrived for the afternoon session. He was alone. He'd sent Ayers ahead to the equipment bay with some reason that Ayers recognized as manufactured but didn't challenge. He stood at the line with his weapon at rest and watched her approach the way he watched everything on a range with precise attention and no visible reaction. I want to ask you something, he said when she was close enough. Okay, she said. And I want you to actually answer, but not the thing you say when you don't want to answer. She stopped next to him. I'll do my best. He looked out at the targets for a moment. I've been shooting competitively since I was 15 years old. I've trained with some of the best precision shooters in the military. I've studied every published technique, every Olympic level method, every special operations qualification standard. He paused. And I have never seen what you did at 600 meters. Not in person, not on video. He turned to look at her. Where does that come from? She was quiet for a moment. Do you want the answer that sounds good or the answer that's true, the true one? The true one is that I spent 4 years in conditions where a missed shot meant other people died, not hypothetically, immediately and directly. She looked out at the range. After enough of those situations, you stop thinking about the shot. You stop thinking about the wind or the distance or the technique. You just understand what has to happen and you make it happen. The body learns things the mind can't fully explain afterward. Mitchell absorbed this, 4 years in conditions like that, approximately, where she looked at him. I can't tell you that. He nodded slowly. He had expected that answer. It was still a different experience to receive it. Were you alone? The question surprised her. She glanced at him. Sometimes. That's the part I can't imagine, he said. Not the distance, not the technique. Being that far out with that much weight on a single decision and being alone with it. She was quiet. No, she said finally. That part doesn't get easier. It was the most personal thing she had said to anyone at Redstone. She didn't know why she'd said it to him. Maybe because he'd asked the right question. Maybe because he was the only person on the base who wasn't trying to place her in a category she didn't fit. He looked back at the targets. I want to run the full course with you, not as a competition. I just want to see it properly. All right, she said. They ran the course together. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Redstone, Emily Carter shot at her actual ceiling. Not the controlled performance of someone managing perceptions. Not the careful restraint of someone who knows that showing everything at once is strategically unwise. She shot the way she had been trained to shoot by people whose names she would never say in a public space, using a methodology that had no official name in any training manual, in conditions that were significantly more forgiving than the ones in which she had learned it. Mitchell shot brilliantly. She shot above that. He stood at the line afterward, checking her groupings on his tablet, and said nothing for a long time. You were holding back yesterday, he finally said. Yes. Why? Because the first day in a new environment is for watching, she said, not for showing. He thought about that. And today I wanted you to see clearly. He looked at her. Why, hi. She looked back at him. Because you're going to need to trust me when it matters. And that's easier if you've seen the truth first. The range was empty except for the two of them and the dust moving across the field in the particular way it moved in the Arizona afternoon. Mitchell said, "What's coming?" I don't know exactly, she said, which was partially true. But something is. Major twist, 22 minutes. 3 days after she arrived, she found the file. Not by accident. She had been looking for it since her first hour on the base, working quietly through the access points that her transfer credentials provided, going carefully through the administrative layers that most officers treated as background infrastructure, and that she had learned to read the way other people read maps. She found it in a training records archive that had been improperly migrated in a system update 18 months earlier. The kind of error that happens when database administrators are given too many tasks and too little time. A folder that should have been restricted had been moved into a general training records directory. It was still encrypted, but the encryption was 4 years old and used a protocol she recognized. She didn't open it on a base computer. She wrote down what she needed and closed the directory and walked out of the records room with the particular unhurried gait of someone who has just found exactly what they came for and has absolutely no intention of showing it on their face. Back in her quarters, in the 30 minutes before evening briefing, she sat with a small notebook and reconstructed what she had seen. The folder name alone was enough to confirm what she had suspected since the order sending her to Redstone had arrived on her desk 6 weeks ago. Enough to understand why the request had come from the level it had come from. Enough to understand why the general had looked at her in the briefing room with the expression of someone confirming something rather than seeing something new. She sat with the notebook for a long moment. Then she tore out the page, folded it once, and put it in the inner pocket of her field jacket. Someone at Redstone had been feeding information to the wrong people for a very long time. And whoever it was, they were still here. Audience retention hook, 24 minutes. That evening, Gaines found her in the mess hall and sat down across from her with the look of a man carrying something. Cole submitted a formal inquiry, he said. She kept eating. About what? About your transfer paperwork. He's requesting a full review of your credentials through the administrative office. He paused. He has the authority to do that. It's within his role. I know. It's going to draw attention. More attention than yesterday's range scores. He almost smiled. Different attention, the kind that comes with paperwork, the kind that goes upward. How far upward? Depends on what the review finds. If your credentials hold at every level, it stops where it starts. If there's a gap anywhere. There's no gap, she said. He looked at her. You're certain. The paperwork is complete. Cole doesn't think so. Cole spent 6 years running a supply station, she said. He has a very specific picture of how the world is organized. I don't fit that picture. That bothers him. But a formal inquiry is going to go places he doesn't have access to, and when it comes back, it's going to tell him less than he knows right now. Gaines thought about that. That's either very reassuring or very unsettling. Yes, she said, but sat with the ambiguity. There's something else. One of the junior recruits, Holloway, was overheard telling his bunk section that your range scores were manipulated. that someone adjusted the target readings. Emily set her fork down. He said that, loudly, in front of 7 people. She was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone who is hurt, the quiet of someone who is making a decision. Where is he now? Evening recreation, East Building. She stood up, picked up her tray. Thank you, Lieutenant. Carter. He said it with a warning in it. She looked at him. Don't do anything that generates more paperwork, he said. She left without making any promises. Mini climax 27 minutes. She found Holloway exactly where Gaines said he would be sitting with 4 other recruits in the recreation room, loud and comfortable in the way of young soldiers who haven't yet been anywhere that cost them their confidence. She walked in and stood by the door and waited. It took him 12 seconds to notice her. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something changes in the air. She hadn't done anything visible. She was just standing there. But there was something in the way she stood there that produced silence. Holloway looked at her. His expression moved through several phases quickly. First surprise, then a reaching for the bravado he'd been performing for his section all evening. Captain, he said with a nod that was calibrated to be just short of respectful. I heard what you said about the range scores, she said. The 4 soldiers around him looked at the floor. Holloway held his expression. He was 22 years old and he'd been the best soldier in every room he'd occupied since basic training. And he had learned from that history that confidence was mostly about refusing to show the moment when your certainty started slipping. You said someone adjusted the target readings, and she said, to make my scores look better than they were. I was speculating. To 7 people. His jaw tightened. With all due respect, Captain, I've been on this range for 6 months. I know what scores at 600 meters look like. And what you posted yesterday. Do you want to go back to the range, she said. He blinked. What? Right now, tonight. The range is open until 2200. I'll run the 600-meter course again. No range crew, no official scoring, just you, your eyes, and whatever conclusion you reach yourself. She paused. Do you want to go? The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. One of the soldiers next to Holloway made a small, involuntary movement, like he wanted to reach over and grab Holloway's arm and tell him not to answer. Holloway looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his expression changed. Not into respect, not yet, into something more complicated. The first crack of a person encountering something they don't have a box for. You do that, just walk back out there and shoot it again. I just offered to, she said. He sat with that. No, he finally said. He looked down. No, I don't need to go. If you have a question about my scores, she said, you come to me directly, not to your section, not to the corridor, to me, in person, with your name on it. She let that sit for a second. That's the only version of this conversation I'm interested in having. She left. 4 soldiers in that room would not forget that moment for the rest of their careers. Not because she had humiliated Holloway, because she had given him a way out and let him take it, and the dignity she offered him in doing that was more unsettling than any confrontation would have been. Holloway sat in the recreation room for a long time after she left and did not say another word that evening. Mini climax 31 minutes. General Caldwell called her at 21:15, not through official channels, on a secondary line that she answered on the second ring. You found something in the archive, he said, no greeting. She didn't ask how he knew. Yes, sir. How much? Enough to confirm the shape of it, not enough to identify the individual. He was quiet for a moment. The formal inquiry Cole submitted is going to move things faster than I'd planned. I know. It's going to draw attention from the same direction we're watching, which means whoever it is will feel the pressure, she said. That's useful. Or it accelerates their timeline. Yes, she said. That's also possible. Another pause. Are you prepared for that scenario? She thought about the folded page in her jacket pocket. Yes, sir. Carter. He said her name with a weight that had nothing bureaucratic in it. I brought you here because there are people on this base I can't read anymore. People I've worked with for years who have started showing patterns I can't explain through normal means. You've operated in environments where reading people is the difference between coming home and not. I need that. I understand. I need you to find out who it is before the inquiry closes, because if the inquiry lands on the wrong desk before we know the name, we lose the thread entirely. Understood, she paused. Sir, Cole's inquiry. Did he submit it on his own initiative or did someone suggest it to him? The silence that followed was 2 seconds long. In communication terms, 2 seconds is a very long time. I don't know, Caldwell said. That's worth knowing, she said. Yes, he said. It is. The line went quiet. She sat in her quarters with the phone in her hand and let the new information settle in around the existing shape of things. Cole might not be acting alone. Cole might be exactly what he appeared to be, a territorial supply sergeant who didn't like being challenged. Or Cole might be the kind of person who makes himself useful to the wrong people without fully understanding what he's being useful for. Those were two very different problems. She would need to know which one it was before she moved again. She lay back, looked at the ceiling, and let her mind do what it did in the hours between action and sleep, building maps. Not terrain maps, people maps, lines between them, the pressures they were under, the things they wanted and the things they were afraid of, and the places where fear and want crossed to create the kind of behavior that gave people away. Someone on this base was feeding information out. They had been doing it long enough to be comfortable. And comfortable people, in her experience, had a very specific vulnerability. They had started to believe they were invisible. She closed her eyes. She would let them keep believing that for a little while longer. Mini climax 36 minutes. The next morning, Ayers found her before Mitchell did. I was a careful soldier, Ayers, younger than Mitchell by 4 years, and quieter by a significant margin, with the particular observational intelligence of someone who had learned early that paying attention was more valuable than talking. He fell into step beside her as she walked toward the planning building and said without preamble, "Someone accessed Mitchell's personnel file last night. The internal system logged it." She kept walking. "Whose credentials?" "That's the thing. The log shows an administrative override, which means either someone has admin access or someone has credentials that read as admin." She absorbed this. "Does Mitchell know?" "Not yet. I came to you first." He paused. "I'm not sure why." "Because it felt like the right call," she said. He thought about that. "Yeah." "Does Gaines know?" "No." "Good. Keep it that way for now." She glanced at him. "How did you catch it?" "I run a log check on my own file every morning. Security habit. I noticed the system timestamp was off on mine, and I went looking." He said it plainly, like it was normal. It wasn't normal. It was the kind of practice that soldiers developed in environments where the internal threat was as real as the external one. "Where'd you develop that habit?" she asked. I was quiet for a moment. "Deployment, second year. We had an intelligence leak that cost us 3 people before we identified the source." She nodded. They reached the planning building door. "Ayers," she said. He looked at her. "You're going to be useful," she said. He looked uncertain whether that was a compliment or a warning. "Is that good?" "Yes," she said, "as long as you stay careful." She went inside. He stood for a moment at the door, then turned and went to find Mitchell. The morning was already moving fast, and under the surface of everything that looked like a normal training day at a military base in the Arizona desert, something was pulling tighter with every hour that passed, the way things pull tight before they break, and everyone who was paying close enough attention could feel it, that particular atmospheric pressure that precedes events that change what a place is and who the people in it understand themselves to be. Emily felt it most clearly of all. She had felt it before she knew what came next. She sat down at the planning table, opened her terrain folder, and began to work through what she knew piece by piece, with the focused patience of someone who has learned that the most important skill in any operation is not speed, not firepower, not even precision. It is knowing with absolute certainty when it is time to stop waiting and move. That moment was almost here. She could feel it in the air, the same way she could feel wind changes at 600 meters. Not through analysis, through something older, something the 4 years of impossible missions had written directly into her nervous system. She turned a page. She kept working. Cole's formal inquiry came back in 48 hours. That was fast. Faster than the standard administrative timeline, which ran 5 to 7 business days for a credentials review at this level. The speed of it told Emily something before she even read the result. Someone had pushed it. Someone with enough access to the administrative pipeline to flag it as priority without leaving a visible signature on the acceleration. She was in the planning room when Gaines brought her the notification. He set it on the table in front of her without comment and stood back and watched her face while she read it. She read it twice, then as she set it down. It cleared on, she said. Completely, he said. Every credential verified, every transfer signature confirmed, every classification level validated at the appropriate tier. He paused. Cole got a formal response this morning informing him that his inquiry had been reviewed, resolved, and closed, and that any further questions about Captain Carter's credentials should be directed to an office whose contact number, when you call it, routes to a line that doesn't answer. Emily looked at him. How do you know what happens when you call it? Because I called it, he said. She almost smiled. And it rang 11 times and then disconnected. No voicemail, no automated response, nothing. He pulled out a chair and sat down. Carter, I've been in the military for 22 years. I know what a dead-end number means. It means whatever is behind your file is several floors above anything I have clearance for, and whoever put it there is very good at making things look like nothing while being something significant. The credentials are real, she said. I'm not questioning that. I'm trying to understand the shape of what I'm working next to. He leaned forward slightly. The general included you in a senior briefing your first week here. He referred to your request personally. And now an inquiry that should have begun in 5 days closed in 48 hours. He looked at her steadily. So I'm asking you directly, not as your commanding officer, but as someone who has been watching this base for 9 years and knows when something underneath it is moving. What is actually happening here? Emily sat with the question for a moment. She had been calculating this disclosure since the first morning. How much to give him? When? Gaines was exactly the kind of person she needed on her side, methodical, observant, loyal to the institution rather than to individual relationships within it. That last quality was the important one. It meant he would do the right thing even when it was difficult. I can tell you some of it, she said. Not all of it, not yet. Some of it is more than I have. There's an information problem at this base, she said. Not a training problem, not a personnel management problem, an intelligence problem. Information is moving out through a channel that shouldn't exist to people who shouldn't have it. It's been happening for long enough that whoever is doing it feels secure. Gaines didn't move for a moment. How long? Based on what I've reconstructed, at least 14 months. He absorbed that. What kind of information? Training rotations, deployment readiness assessments, personnel evaluations for candidates entering advanced programs. His face changed, not dramatically, just a tightening around the eyes that meant the implications were landing. If someone has been feeding deployment readiness data out for 14 months, then people in the field have been making decisions based on information about our operational capacity, she said. Yes, he sat back. People could have been hurt. It's possible. He was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that has work happening inside it. Who knows about this, besides you and whoever sent you here? The general. Who else? That's all. He looked at the table, then back at her. And you need it to stay that way. For now. Because if the person responsible finds out they're being looked at, they'll change their behavior or destroy evidence or both, she said. And we lose the thread. He nodded slowly. Cole's inquiry, he said. You think he submitted it independently? I think it's worth knowing whether someone suggested it to him. Gaines looked at her with an expression that meant he was revising something. You think Cole might be? I think Cole is probably exactly what he looks like, she said. A territorial man who doesn't like being challenged. But sometimes territorial men who don't like being challenged are useful to other people. And sometimes they don't know they're being used. And sometimes they do, Gaines said. Yes, she said. Sometimes they do. He stood up. He moved to the door, then stopped. Carter, what do you need from me? Normal, she said. I need everything here to look completely normal. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who has just been told the most difficult thing he'll hear all week. I'll do my best, he said. He meant it. Mini climax 8 minutes. Mitchell found her at the equipment range at 1100 hours, which was where she had been every morning since her second day working through a series of drills that the range crew had stopped pretending not to watch. He came in from the north entrance and crossed the field towards her with the direct stride of a man who has made a decision. I need to show you something, he said. She lowered her weapon. All right. He held out his tablet. On the screen was a personnel system log. She looked at it, then she looked at him. Where did you get this Ayers? He came to me this morning. He took the tablet back. Someone accessed my file. And when I dug backward through the log, the way Ayers taught me to do last year, I found that this isn't the first time. My file has been accessed 4 times in the last 6 months using administrative override credentials. Same signature each time. Have you identified the credentials? That's the problem. Administrative override at this level should require two-factor confirmation and a supervisor cosign. These accesses have a cosign, but the supervisor ID that's signing off is... He stopped. She looked at him. What? It's a deceased officer, he said, a Major Hendricks. He died in a training accident 16 months ago. His credentials should have been deactivated on the day of death. Standard protocol. The air between them changed quality. Someone kept his credentials active, she said, or reactivated them, or accessed the deactivation queue and pulled them out before they processed. He looked at her directly. Carter, I've been at this base for 3 years. I know most of the people here. I know how they work and what they care about and how they talk when they're under pressure. He paused. This is not something a low-level actor does. Keeping a dead officer's credentials functional requires access to the HR administration backend. That's not a corporal with too much curiosity. That's someone who knows the system. How many people on this base have HR administration backend access? He had already looked it up. 7, including the general. Walk me through the 7, she said. He did. And as he named them, she cross-referenced them against the map she had been building in her head for the last 72 hours, the one that tracked access patterns and behavioral changes and small inconsistencies that individually meant nothing and together meant everything. By the time he finished the list, she had narrowed it. Not to a name, not yet, but to a direction. Don't do anything with this today, she said. Don't access those logs again. Don't talk to Ayers about it. Don't mention it to Gaines. You already talked to Gaines, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And he's going to run normal, which is what I need you to do too. He looked frustrated in the controlled way of someone who has learned that some frustrations have to be managed rather than expressed. How long? Not long, she said. That's not a timeline. It's the best I have right now. He handed her the tablet. I want a copy of everything on that log. Can you access it from your credentials? She took the tablet, looked at the log, pulled what she needed in her memory the way she had been trained to do in rooms where writing things down was too dangerous. Handed it back. I have what I need, she said. He stared at her. You just memorized that. Yes, he looked at the tablet, looked at her. All right, he said with the tone of someone who is adding another data point to a picture that keeps getting larger. All right, so major twist, 18 minutes. She went to find Cole at 1400 hours, not because she suspected him most, because she suspected him least, and that was the version of the problem she needed to resolve first. She found him in the supply station running his afternoon inventory, which he did every day at the same time with the consistency of a man whose predictability was his security. She walked in. He saw her, his jaw set. Captain, he said. Sergeant Cole. She stopped at the counter. I wanted to come and tell you in person that the inquiry closed. I heard. I'm not here about that. She folded her hands on the counter. I'm here because I want to ask you something and I'd like you to think about it before you answer. He set his clipboard down. His posture shifted into the particular wariness of someone who has decided they're being set up but can't see from which direction. What? In the days before you submitted the inquiry, she said, did anyone suggest it to you? Not directly. Maybe a comment, something casual, someone mentioning your role or your authority or the fact that transfer credentials at this level can be challenged. He stared at her. You're asking if someone put me up to it. I'm asking if someone pointed you toward the idea. The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. She watched his face with the patient precision of someone who has been reading involuntary expressions in high-stakes environments for a decade. His jaw moved. His eyes went left, not in the direction of fabrication, in the direction of memory. Doyle, he said, and then immediately looked like he wished he hadn't. She kept her face completely neutral. Major Doyle. He didn't tell me to do anything, Cole said quickly. He mentioned maybe 4 days before I submitted that a lot of unusual transfer packages had been coming through lately and that it was within the supply staff's rights to request verification when something felt off. He paused. He was making conversation in the mess hall. Who else was in the conversation? 3 or 4 people. It wasn't directed at me specifically. but his voice had lost its certainty because he was a smart enough man when he stopped defending his position to hear what he'd just said. Cole, she said, you did your job. You used the authority you had. That's not the problem. He looked at her. Then what is the problem? The problem is figuring out why specifically that conversation happened when it did. I was quiet. Something was moving across his face that wasn't his usual territorial confidence. It looked closer to a man recalibrating. You think Doyle is? I don't think anything yet, she said. I'm building information. He picked up his clipboard, set it down again. If I had known, you couldn't have known, she said. That's the point. The people who do this are good at making sure you can't know. He looked at her for a long moment. The man who had thrown her paperwork across the counter and laughed in front of a room full of recruits and said, "Get this woman out of my station." He looked at her now with a completely different expression. Not admiration, not apology, something more honest than either, recognition of the kind of gap that exists between what you think is happening and what actually is. "What do you need from me?" he said. It was the second time in one day someone had asked her that. She was building a team out of people who hadn't known they were joining one. Normal, she said, exactly like always. Audience retention hook 22 minutes. Major Robert Doyle ran the advanced tactics section with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent enough time in the military to understand that institutional power was mostly about controlling information flow. He was 44 years old, decorated, respected, and had a way of being in conversations without appearing to direct them that most people experienced as social intelligence, and that was in fact something more deliberate. Emily had been watching him since the first briefing, not overtly, the way you watch something that might be dangerous with your peripheral attention and your full focus held slightly to the side of it, so that if it moves, you catch the movement without having appeared to be watching. She had cataloged 14 behavioral markers in the 3 days since her arrival. Small things, the way he positioned himself relative to the general in every room they shared, the way he handled questions he didn't want to answer, not by deflecting, but by expanding, filling the conversational space with related material until the original question was surrounded rather than addressed. The way his attention moved in briefings, not toward the speaker, but toward the people around the speaker. I was always reading in the room. That was the marker she trusted most. In her experience, people who were always reading the room had learned at some point that the room was the real source of information, not the official content, the people. That was a skill that belonged to a specific type of person. She needed to put him in a situation where the information he was reading was information she controlled. She went to his office at 1500 hours. She knocked. "Come in." He looked up when she entered, and his expression performed the correct amount of pleasant, professional surprise. "Captain Carter, what can I do for you?" She closed the door, sat down without being invited. He noticed both things, but his face didn't say so. "I want to run a scenario with your section," she said. "An evaluation exercise. Full staff. I've run this protocol in advanced settings before, and I think it would be useful here." He leaned back in his chair with the relaxed posture of someone who is extremely alert. "What kind of scenario?" "Internal security simulation," she said. "We seed a false information packet into the training system. Sensitive-looking data. Deployment readiness assessments, personnel evaluations, that kind of thing. Deliberately formatted to look real. Then we watch where it goes." He was completely still for exactly 1 second. Then he smiled. "A leak test. A training exercise," she said, "designed to evaluate information security protocols and identify any gaps in the administrative communication chain." "Right." He nodded slowly. "That's a solid methodology. I've seen it used at the command level." He paused. "Who knows about this?" "I'm bringing it to you first," she said, "since your section would be the primary distribution point for the seeded material." He looked at her. She looked back. The surface of the conversation was smooth and professional and completely cooperative. Underneath it, something very different was happening, and both of them knew it, and neither of them showed it. "I'd want to run it by the general," he said. "Of course," she said. "I'll set up a meeting." She stood, moved toward the door. "Carter," he said. She stopped. "You've been here less than a week," he said. His voice was perfectly level. "You move fast." She turned. "I've found it's usually worth it." He held her gaze for a moment longer than was natural. I'm sure you have, he said. She left. In the corridor outside his office, she walked without changing pace and without letting anything show on her face. But her mind was running at full speed. I hadn't said yes. He hadn't said no. He had said he would take it to the general, which was the correct professional response, and which told her nothing on its face. But his stillness at the moment she described the scenario, that single second of absolute physical cessation, told her everything she needed. A man with nothing to hide would have reacted with mild professional interest. A man with something to hide would have worked hard to produce mild professional interest. Doyle had produced it too quickly and too well. The performance was technically perfect and one beat ahead of where a natural reaction would have been. She had been watching performers under pressure for 4 years. She knew the difference. Mini climax 27 minutes. The general called her at 1700 hours. Doyle came to see me, he said. I expected he would. He told me about your proposal, the information security exercise. Yes, sir. A pause. I was very enthusiastic about it. She stopped walking. She was in the corridor outside the planning room, and she stopped moving completely. He was enthusiastic. He said it was excellent methodology, that he'd seen similar protocols used at the command level, and he thought Redstone would benefit significantly from the exercise. He suggested we run it through his section with him as lead coordinator. The geometry of the situation shifted. She stood in the corridor and let it shift, following the new shape of it, understanding what it meant. Doyle wasn't running from the trap. He was walking toward it, because a man who was coordinating the leak and who suddenly found himself in charge of the leak test could do several things with that position. He could control what got seeded. He could control where it went. He could use the exercise itself as cover for a genuine information transfer. He could make the test produce a false negative. I was smart. He was very smart. And he thought she was a soldier with good instincts and an aggressive methodology who had just handed him exactly the tool he needed. He didn't know yet what she was actually doing. Sir, she said, let him run it. Carter, let him run it. Give him full coordination authority. Let him design the seeded packet. Silence on the line. You want him to design the material he'll potentially be leaking. Yes, sir. Another silence, longer. Walk me through it. If he designs the packet, he knows exactly what's in it, which means when we track where it goes, we're not tracking information, we're tracking his choices. The specific decision he makes about what to seed, what to exclude, how to format it, and most importantly, how quickly it moves from the internal system to wherever it's going. She paused. A man controlling the test still has to make contact with his channel. He still has to send something. And the moment he does that, we have everything. The general was quiet for a long time. The risk, he said, is that real information gets attached to the seeded packet. I'll build the packet parameters, she said. I'll make it look completely real to someone reading it, but the specific data points will be constructed. Nothing in it will have operational value. You can do that without him seeing the construction. He'll receive the seeded material as a finalized document. The construction happens on my end first. Another pause. He's going to think he's won a round. Yes, she said. Let him think that. A long exhale from the general. All right, I'll approve his coordination role tomorrow morning. You have 24 hours to build the packet. Understood. Carter, his voice dropped slightly. If this goes wrong, if he identifies the trap before we get the transmission, then we move to the direct approach, she said, and we do it fast. He hung up. She stood in the corridor for a moment, in the particular silence that comes before a thing that has been building reaches its surface, and let herself feel the weight of what she was setting in motion. This was the part of operations that nobody made films about, not the confrontations, not the reveals. This middle space where you had to hold the entire structure in your head and move every piece simultaneously without letting any of them show you were moving them. She started walking again. She had 24 hours. She would use all of them. Mini climax 31 minutes. Eris found her in the planning room at 1900, which was where she spent most of her evenings and which the base had started treating as a known quantity. The woman in the planning room with the terrain maps. The detail they'd absorbed without understanding. I ran the personnel access log back further, he said. He set a printed sheet on the table. 18 months, not 14. She looked at the sheet. You went further back than I asked. I went as far as the system let me without triggering an alert. He sat down across from her. 18 months of unauthorized access to personnel files, deployment readiness data, training evaluation records. He pointed to a cluster of dates. These three here, 6 weeks before a joint training exercise with the Southern Command was canceled due to what the official record calls a logistics issue. I looked up that exercise. It was classified as compromised. She looked at the dates, then at him. You've been doing this kind of analysis for a while. Since the deployment, he said. I built the habit there. He paused. After we lost the 3 people I told you about, I spent a lot of time afterward going through communications logs, looking for the point where the information broke. I found it eventually. It was in a file access pattern that looked completely routine until you mapped it against operational timelines. He looked at the sheet. This looks like that. It is like that, she said. He looked up. How bad? Bad enough. He nodded. He was 26 years old, and he had the eyes of someone significantly older. The deployment had done that. What do you need me to do? She studied him for a moment. He was the 4th person who had asked her that question. She was building something at this base she hadn't fully planned for a network of people who had decided for their own reasons and on their own timelines that she was the right direction to face. I need you to set up a monitoring flag on the internal training system, she said. Not on specific files, on access patterns. Any document that matches the parameters I'm going to give you. I need to know the second it's open, forwarded, or copied. That's technically within my system privileges, he said. But it'll need a supervisor sign-off. I'll get you the sign-off, she said. Tonight. He raised an eyebrow. Tonight. Yes. He picked up the printed sheet and folded it. All right. He stood. Carter. He said her name like he was testing the weight of it. Are we going to get whoever this is? She looked at him. Yes, she said. He nodded once. Definitive. The nod of someone who has been waiting for an answer like that for a long time and has just received it. He left. She called the general. He gave her the sign-off in 4 minutes flat. Major twist 36 minutes. At 2200 hours, she was in her quarters cross-referencing the access log Ayers had pulled against the 7 names on Mitchell's HR administration list when her secondary line rang. She answered. Silence for 3 seconds. Then a voice she recognized. Not because she had heard it at Redstone, because she had heard it years ago in a different country, in a different context, in conditions that neither of them were supposed to survive. You're at Redstone, the voice said. She sat completely still. Her hand holding the phone did not move. Her breathing remained even. These were things she had trained until they were automatic. Who is this? She said. You know who this is? She did. The knowledge hit her with the particular quality of information that changes the structure of everything around it. Not like a surprise, like a missing piece arriving, and suddenly the shape of what you've been looking at resolves into something you should have seen earlier. How did you get this number? She said. The same way I've been getting everything else, the voice said. You're looking in the right direction, by the way. You're just 1 level too low. She was on her feet without knowing she had stood. What does that mean? It means Doyle is a conduit. He's not the source. A pause. The source has a much cleaner file. The source has been at Redstone significantly longer than Doyle. The line went dead. She stood in the center of the room holding a dead phone. Her mind ran the new information at full speed. Doyle as conduit, not source. Which meant the access logs, the unauthorized personnel file pulls the dead officer's credentials. Some of it was Doyle and some of it was someone else. Someone with a longer history at the base. Someone with a cleaner profile. Someone who had been there long enough that their access patterns had become invisible against the background of normal activity. She went to the terrain maps, not the territory maps, the people maps she kept in her head, the ones that had been building since her first hour on the base. She went through every name, every face, every behavioral marker she had cataloged. And then she stopped, because one of the 7 names on the HR administration list had been at Redstone for 8 years. And one of the 7 had been present in every room where something sensitive had been casually mentioned. And one of the 7 had called her inquiry closure unusual and sat with her afterward in the mess hall asking careful questions. She looked at the wall. She looked at the name in her memory. For the first time since she had arrived at Redstone, something cold moved through her. Not fear, something more specific. The particular chill of realizing that someone you had begun to trust was the thing you came here to stop. She sat down. She needed to be certain. She needed to be absolutely certain before she moved. Because if she was wrong, she would destroy the career of a man who was exactly what he appeared to be. And if she was right, then everything she had shown him in the last 4 days, every piece of information she had shared, every name she had mentioned, had gone somewhere she hadn't sent it. She sat in the silence of her quarters with that possibility and let it be what it was. Outside, Redstone breathed through its machinery and its schedules and its ordinary military night. Inside, the ordinary something was already moving. She could feel it. She had less time than she'd thought. And the person she trusted most at this base might be the one she should have trusted last. She didn't sleep. Not because she couldn't, because sleeping felt like a decision she hadn't earned yet. She sat in her quarters with the phone in her lap and the people map running in her head and went through every conversation she'd had with Gain since she arrived, pulling each one apart. The way you disassemble a weapon piece by piece, looking for the thing that doesn't belong. The first morning, the coffee, the careful questions, she had read that as professional caution. The behavior of a 9-year veteran who knew when to be careful. The briefing room, the way he'd positioned himself, slightly back from the table. Good sight line to everyone in the room. The mess hall conversation about Cole's inquiry. He'd brought it to her. He'd sat down and told her things. She had read that as alliance building. Now she read it differently. What if he'd been checking what she knew? What if every conversation where he'd come to her had been a calibration exercise, his way of measuring how close she was getting? She sat with that interpretation for 40 minutes, testing it against every specific detail she could recall. And then she stopped, because she was doing the thing that bad analysts did, which was building a theory and then fitting the evidence to it. She had enough experience to know that the evidence had to move first. The theory followed. She needed one more piece. She picked up her secondary line and called the number the voice had used. Dead, completely dead, not disconnected, non-existent. Whoever had called her had used a phone that was no longer operational, which meant either they had destroyed it after the call or they had used a temporary device. Either way, the call was a one-way channel. They had chosen to give her information and had no intention of receiving anything back, which meant they were either genuinely trying to help her or they were steering her. She set the phone down. At 0300, she went to the planning room, spread her terrain maps across the table and began building a new kind of map. Not physical, relational. She wrote names on separate sheets and began drawing lines between them. Access to what? Present where? History at the base. Duration, timing of key events against presence in the building. By 0500, she had something that looked less like a theory and more like a structure. And the structure had 2 nodes that kept appearing at every significant junction. Doyle and someone else. Someone whose name she had been treating as background. Someone who had been at Redstone for 8 years. She looked at the map for a long time, then she folded it, put it in her jacket next to the first page she'd torn from her notebook, and went to find Mitchell. Mini climax 6 minutes. He was already up. She found him at the equipment bay, which was where he went when he couldn't sleep, running maintenance on weapons that didn't need it because his hands needed something to do while his mind worked. He looked up when she came in, took one look at her face, set the weapon down. "Tell me," he said. She sat on the bench across from him. "I got a call last night, someone I knew from before. They told me Doyle is a conduit, not the source." Mitchell was quiet. A conduit to who? Someone with 8 or more years at this base, HR administration access. Present at every significant information point I've been able to identify. She paused. "Someone I've been talking to." He went very still. "Who?" She looked at him directly. "I'm not certain yet, and I won't move on it until I am." He held her gaze. "But you have a name." "I have a direction." He leaned forward slightly. "Carter, if you're about to tell me it's someone I've trusted for 3 years, I'm not telling you anything yet," she said, "because I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong and I've named someone, that's a damage I can't undo." He sat back. His jaw worked. "What do you need?" "I built the information security packet last night," she said. "It's ready to seed into the system. Doyle is going to receive it this morning as the official exercise material. I need you to help me run the monitoring protocol without Ayers. He frowned. Why not Ayers? Because Ayers is going to be positioned somewhere else today, somewhere visible. I need the monitoring to happen without any connection to either of us. Then who runs it? She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded page, set it on the bench between them. You do, from this terminal location using these credentials. The general authorized them at 00200. He looked at the page, looked at her. You've been up all night. Yes. And you already called the general. Yes. He picked up the page. Read it. Set it down. All right, he paused. Carter, the name you're not telling me. When you know for certain, you tell me first, before anyone else. She looked at him for a moment. Why, Bud? Because he said, and his voice had something in it that was not quite anger and not quite grief. If it's who I think you think it is, I need to hear it from someone I trust before I hear it from anyone else. The quiet between them was heavy. All right, she said. He nodded once, picked up the weapon he'd been cleaning and set it aside. I'll be at the terminal by 0700. She stood. One more thing. What? Whatever you see on that monitor today, whatever the data shows, you don't react. You don't move. You don't change your face. You record it and you wait for me. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has just been asked to hold something very hot without showing that it burns. Understood, he said. She left him in the equipment bay with the map in his hand and everything he didn't know yet sitting between them like a third person in the room. Mini climax 10 minutes. Doyle received the seated packet at 0815. She watched him receive it from across the briefing room where the general had called a short administrative meeting. She watched his eyes when the notification came through on his tablet. He read it quickly, then looked up and met the general's eyes and said, "The exercise material came through, sir. I'll begin the distribution protocol this morning." Good, Caldwell said. Keep me updated. Doyle nodded. His expression was professional and engaged. She watched his hands. His left thumb moved twice against the edge of the tablet in a specific pattern. It was involuntary, the kind of physical tell that surfaces under pressure in people who are otherwise very controlled. He was communicating, not in the room. But the decision to communicate had just been made, and his body had registered it before his mind had fully processed the choice. She looked at the general. He was watching the meeting agenda. He had not seen the thumb. She had. After the meeting, she walked directly to the planning room and called Mitchell. "He's moving today," she said. "I'm watching," Mitchell said. His voice was flat and controlled. Range voice. The voice he used when he was in a position and waiting. "The packet will go out to his section by 0900. Watch for any secondary distribution that doesn't match the official exercise parameters." "Understood." A pause. "Carter." "What?" "Ayers just walked past the terminal. He looked at me. He knows something is happening." She thought fast. "Let him look. Don't explain. If he asks you directly, tell him it's an authorized monitoring exercise, and he'll be briefed at the conclusion. Nothing else. He's not going to like that." "No," she said. "He's not." She hung up. She sat at the planning table for exactly 3 minutes, which was the amount of time she allowed herself to hold the full complexity of what was moving simultaneously. Doyle distributing the packet, Mitchell watching the system, Ayers circling the edge of something he wasn't cleared for yet, the anonymous caller's words running underneath everything. One level higher, cleaner file. She stood up. She went to find Gaines. Audience retention, hook 14 minutes. He was in his office. The door was open. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and something moved across his face that was so fast she almost missed it. Almost. A tightening, then release. Then the professional, pleasant expression of a man welcoming a colleague. She sat down across from him. "The exercise is running," she said. "Good." Doyle seems engaged with it. "Very." She watched his hands, folded on the desk, relaxed. "I wanted to update you directly since you've been the most support to me since I arrived." He tilted his head slightly. "I've just tried to be useful." "You have been." She paused. "I want to ask you something personal." He opened his hand slightly. "Go ahead." "When you called the dead-end number in my file," she said, "the one that rang 11 times. What time did you make that call?" He blinked. "What?" "You told me you called it the day after the inquiry came back. I'm asking what time." He thought about it. Mid-morning, 11, maybe 11:30. She nodded slowly. And you called it from your office phone? Yes. He frowned slightly. Why, I'm cross-referencing call logs as part of the security audit, she said. Standard protocol, making sure all contacts with restricted numbers are properly documented. Of course. He held her gaze. Steady, open. Whatever you need. She stood. Thank you, Lieutenant. She walked out. In the corridor, she kept her pace exactly even. Because the call log from the General's communications office, which she had accessed at 0400 that morning, showed every call made to or from her secondary line and her file contact number in the last 72 hours. Gaines had called the dead-end number at 11:14 on the day after the inquiry closed. She had already verified that. What she had just verified was that he remembered the time accurately, which meant he remembered the call specifically, which meant it was not casual. It was not routine. She kept walking. Her phone buzzed. Mitchell, she answered without speaking. It moved, he said. 0947. The seeded packet left Doyle's section distribution and went to a secondary address that is not part of the official exercise parameters. Encrypted, external routing through a proxy server. Did you capture the destination? Partial. The proxy masks the end address, but I have the routing signature. Ayers could probably decode it if we... Don't bring Ayers in yet. She stopped at the end of the corridor. Mitchell, the routing signature. Does it match anything in the base communication logs? A pause. The sound of keys. Give me 60 seconds. She waited. 58 seconds. Carter. His voice had changed. The range steadiness was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. It matches a communication signature from 14 months ago, pulled from the archive. A routine training report that was sent from a base terminal to an external address that was later flagged by a federal communications review. Flagged by whom? The flag doesn't show an office, it shows an authorization code. He read it to her. She knew that code. She had seen it once before in a classified briefing she had attended 3 years ago in a room with no windows and no recording equipment, and 6 other people who had all signed documents promising never to discuss what was said in it. The authorization code belonged to a federal counterintelligence unit. They had been watching Redstone for 14 months, and they had not told General Caldwell. She stood in the corridor with that information and felt the shape of everything she'd been building shift into a completely new configuration. Not wrong, reoriented. The counterintelligence unit had been running their own operation inside the same space she was now running hers. Parallel tracks, neither aware of the other until this moment, which meant the anonymous call last night had not come from an old contact trying to help her. It had come from someone on the counterintelligence team, someone who had seen her arrive at Redstone and realized they were working the same target, someone who had decided to accelerate their timeline by feeding her the piece she was missing. Mitchell, she said, still here. I need you to do something, and I need you to do it right now. Tell me. The packet destination, the external routing address. I need you to flag it as a security incident in the base system and notify the general directly. Not through channels. Call him on his personal line right now. That's going to set everything moving. Yes, she said. That's what needs to happen. A pause. Carter, are you sure about this? Make the call, Mitchell. He made the call. Sure. Major twist, 22 minutes. The general's response was immediate. Within 6 minutes of Mitchell's call, Caldwell had activated the base security protocol that locked down external communications. Not dramatically, not with sirens or visible alerts. The kind of lockdown that looks from the outside like nothing. From the inside, it meant that every outgoing communication from Redstone was now being captured and held in a review queue before transmitting. If Doyle or anyone else tried to send anything in the next hour, it would sit in the queue, and Caldwell would see it. Emily was in the corridor outside the general's office when he came out. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has just received information that required him to revise several years of assumptions. 14 months, he said, at minimum, she said, and a federal counterintelligence team has been watching. Yes, sir. I was quiet for a moment. The weight of that sat between them. A federal team operating inside his base without his knowledge, without his consent, watching people he'd commanded for years. Why didn't they come to me? Because, she said carefully, in an operation of this type, The commanding officer of the compromised facility is not automatically cleared to know about the monitoring. Not because of suspicion, because of protocol. If the source has any access to the CO's communications, then telling me could have burned the operation, he said. Yes, sir, he looked at the wall. And you, did you know about the federal team when you arrived? No, sir, she paused. I knew there was a problem at Redstone. I was sent to identify it. The federal team's involvement became clear to me last night. After the call. Yes, he turned. Who made the call, Carter? She looked at him directly. I don't know their identity. I know which unit they belong to. And I know that the information they gave me accelerated this significantly. He studied her face. One level higher, they said. Yes. Meaning Doyle is not the primary source. Doyle is the mechanism. The source has deeper access and longer tenure. She paused. Sir, the communication routing signature that Mitchell flagged, the 14-month-old match, I need you to pull the original transmission and look at which terminal it was sent from. He looked at her. I've already pulled it, he said. The way he said it told her everything. He already knew. He had known or suspected for longer than this morning. She held his gaze. How long? He looked away. 3 weeks. I started seeing patterns 3 weeks ago. That's when I requested your transfer. He came back to her eyes. I needed someone who could move inside the base without being read by the people I was watching. I needed someone without a relationship to anyone here. But you know whose terminal it was? Yes. Sir, she said it quietly. Tell me. He said the name. She had been right, and the name was Gaines. She stood in the corridor outside the general's office and let the confirmation settle. Not with satisfaction, with the particular weight of being right about something you had hoped you were wrong about. She thought about the careful conversations, the coffee at 0600, the way he'd positioned himself to know everything she knew. She thought about the day she'd nearly told him everything and had stopped just short, held back by the instinct that had kept her alive through 4 years of impossible situations. That instinct had been correct. He used Major Hendrix's credentials, she said. Hendrix was his close friend, Caldwell said. He had access to Hendrix's personal effects after the accident. It would have been straightforward to pull the credentials before the deactivation processed. He's been feeding deployment readiness data, personnel evaluations, and training rotation schedules, which was how 3 forward operations in the last 14 months encountered resistance they shouldn't have been able to anticipate. 3 operations. She thought about what that meant in human terms and did not let herself think about it too long or too specifically because this was not the moment for that. Where is he now? She said. His office. Caldwell looked at her. Carter, how do you want to handle this? It was an unusual question from a general. It meant he trusted her judgment about something outside her formal authority. It meant the last 4 days had built something that didn't have an official name. Not in his office, she said, not privately. He needs to understand that it's finished, that the full mechanism has been identified from Hendrix's credentials to the routing proxy to Doyle's distribution role. If there's any chance he has a secondary channel or a final transmission queued, you want to do it publicly. I want to do it where he can see that there's no version of this where he has room to maneuver. She paused. The briefing room. Full senior staff. Give him no warning. Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. 1100, he said. Senior staff briefing, mandatory attendance. He hung up. She had 45 minutes. Mini climax 30 minutes. She used 20 of those minutes to find Doyle. He was in his section office and he looked up when she walked in with the expression of a man who has been waiting for something and is relieved it's finally arriving. Captain Carter, he said, I was going to come find you. The exercise packet has been distributed. The section is running the protocol. She closed the door, sat down across from him. The packet moved outside the exercise parameters at 0947, she said. External routing through a proxy server. His face went through several things quickly. The first was surprise. The second was calculation. The third was a decision she could see him making in real time, the decision about which version of himself to present. That shouldn't have happened. If there was an external routing, someone accessed the distribution system without authorization. Doyle, she said his name with a particular flatness that stopped him. The proxy routing signature matches a communication pattern from 14 months ago. The same 14 months during which personnel data has been moving out through your section. He went very still. I want you to understand something clearly, she said. The full communication chain has been reconstructed. We know what moved when it moved and through which mechanism it moved. Your position in that chain is documented. She paused. What we're determining right now is the degree of your voluntary participation versus the degree to which you were directed. His face had gone to a controlled blankness. I want legal counsel. You'll have it, she said. That's not what I'm asking you for. I'm asking you to tell me how the direction came to you, not what you did, how you were instructed. He looked at the table. She waited. Conversations, he said finally. Very quiet. Over time, it was never a direct order. It was more like understanding developed. What was valuable? What should be passed along? He looked up. It was framed as a counterintelligence exercise. I was told it was authorized at the command level. Who told you that? He said the name. Gaines. She stood up. Thank you, Major. She walked out. In the corridor, she checked her watch. 22 minutes left. She walked to Mitchell's terminal. Mini climax 34 minutes. He was still at the terminal. He looked up when she came in and she could see that he had been sitting with the knowledge of the routing signature match for the last 40 minutes and it had cost him something. His face looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy without being able to set it down. Doyle confirmed it, she said. He closed his eyes, opened them. How long did Doyle know? Long enough. He thought it was authorized. He thought it was. Mitchell stopped. The muscle in his jaw worked. He believed Gaines when Gaines said it was a command-level operation. Yes. And Gaines told him that because it gave Gaines plausible cover. If Doyle ever got caught, he'd look like the source. Gaines would look like a senior officer who had been running an authorized intelligence exercise. That's the structure of it, she said. Mitchell looked at the terminal screen, at the routing signature still displayed there. I've known Gaines for 3 years, he said. I've trusted his judgment. I've recommended soldiers to his attention because I thought his assessment of people was good. He paused. I brought him problems I didn't bring to anyone else because I thought he was the steadiest person on this base. She said nothing. There was nothing to say that would help with that particular pain, and she had learned a long time ago not to try to shortcut grief with words. Is he in his office? Mitchell said. For now. The briefing is in 20 minutes. Yes, he looked at her. Does he know it's coming? No. He nodded. Something settled in his face. Not peace, resolution. The look of a person who has decided to hold themselves steady through something that's going to be hard. I'll be in the briefing room, he said. Mitchell said it before he stood. What you did this morning, the monitoring, the routing, capture, the call to the general. That was excellent work. He looked at her. I just did what you asked me to do. No, she said. You did it well. There's a difference. He held her gaze for a moment. Carter, he said, after this is over, whatever your real clearance level is, whatever the black Talon actually is, whatever those missions were that you can't talk about. He paused. I want you to know that I saw you clearly from the range, from the first day, not what I thought you were, what you actually are. She looked at him. Thank you, she said, and she meant it in a way that didn't need more words. He stood up. They walked to the briefing room together. Major climax 38 minutes. The senior staff filed in at 0 to 1100 without knowing why they'd been called. Cole came in from the supply side and took his usual seat. Doyle came in last, or almost last, and took a seat near the far wall without meeting anyone's eyes. Ayers stood near the back because there weren't enough chairs, which was unusual, and he registered the unusual without showing it. Gaines came in 60 seconds before the hour. He came in the way he always came in, measured, composed, the steady-handed senior lieutenant who had been at Redstone for 8 years and who knew where everything was and how everything worked. He took his usual seat. He looked around the room with his customary awareness. His gaze passed over Emily. She was standing to the right of the general's position at the front of the room. His gaze moved on, then came back. Something changed in his face, so small that no one who hadn't been watching him specifically would have seen it. A fractional tightening, a quality of attention that shifted from the general survey of a room to the focused calculation of a man who has just understood that something is wrong with the geometry. The general walked in. He stood at the front of the room and looked at his staff with the expression of a man who has decided what needs to happen and has made peace with the cost of it. "I'm going to keep this brief," he said. "Over the last 72 hours, a security investigation conducted by Captain Carter has identified an unauthorized information channel operating inside Redstone. Personnel data deployment readiness assessments and training rotation records have been moving to an external party through a routing proxy for approximately 14 months. The room absorbed this with the particular silence of people who do not yet know how to feel because they do not yet know how much of what they're hearing touches them personally. The mechanism of transmission has been fully documented," Caldwell continued. "The routing chain, the access credentials used, and the distribution pathway through the tactics section have all been reconstructed. Federal counterintelligence has been notified and is en route." Cole's face was pale, not because he was guilty, because he understood now what the inquiry he'd filed had been adjacent to. Ayers stood very still at the back of the room. Mitchell sat with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the wall directly ahead of him. Gaines had not moved since the general began speaking. He sat with a stillness that was different from the stillness Emily had noted in him before. This was the stillness of someone who has stopped performing calm and is simply in the moment before something ends. Caldwell looked at him. "Lieutenant Gaines," he said, "you are relieved of your duties pending the federal review. You will surrender your access credentials to Captain Carter immediately." The room did not erupt. It didn't gasp. It went into a kind of crystallized silence that was worse than noise, the silence of 12 people simultaneously recalibrating their understanding of a person they had trusted. Gaines looked at the general, then slowly he looked at Emily. She held his gaze. His face went through something she watched with the care she brought to everything. Not rage, not denial, something more complicated. A man looking at the person who had come into his carefully maintained world and found the thing he'd spent 14 months hiding and understanding in this moment, that the finding had been inevitable, that she was exactly what was needed to find it, and that some part of him, the part that remembered what he was before he made the choices that brought him here, recognized the quality of what had just happened. He reached into his jacket. Every person in the room tensed. He placed his access credentials on the table in front of him. He slid them forward. He did not say anything. Emily walked to the table, picked them up, looked at them once, set them in front of the general. Gaines stood. Two military police officers who had positioned themselves at the door without anyone except Emily and the general having noticed their arrival stepped forward. He went with them without resistance. At the door he stopped, turned back. His eyes found Emily one more time. "You arrived exactly when you were supposed to," he said. His voice was level. There was something in it she didn't have a clean name for. Not quite an apology, not quite respect. Something in between those things that existed in the space where complex men confronted the consequences of their own choices. She said nothing. The door closed. The room exhaled. Mini climax 44 minutes. Caldwell let the silence run for 5 seconds. Then the federal review team will be on site by 1400. All senior staff will be available for individual interviews. Your full cooperation is expected and required. He looked around the table. "Are there questions?" Cole raised his hand. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. "Sir, my inquiry. Was I—" He stopped. Tried again. "Was I used?" "You were manipulated into making a legitimate procedural move that serves someone else's interests," Caldwell said. "You are not under investigation, Sergeant Cole." Cole looked at the table, nodded once, said nothing. Doyle had not moved from his seat near the wall. He would be having a different conversation with a different set of people in the very near future, and he knew it, and the knowledge showed in his posture, in the way that certainty about consequences always shows as a kind of forward collapse, the body beginning to process something the mind hasn't finished accepting. Ayers moved from the back of the room and stopped next to Emily. He said quietly, "You knew last night." "I was developing certainty," she said. "That's why you didn't want me at the terminal." "Yes," he thought about that, "because I would have reacted." "Yes." He looked at the door Gaines had walked through. 3 years, he said. "I learned the log check system from him. He's the one who told me to run it every morning." He paused. "He taught me the habit of looking for access anomalies." Emily looked at him. "He probably did that because people who check their own files don't check anyone else's." Ayers absorbed this. He was using it as a control. It kept you occupied with your own security, which kept you from looking at patterns across the broader system. The realization moved across his face. Until I started working with you. Until you started looking in a different direction, she said. Yes. He stood with that for a moment. Eris, she said, what you found in those logs, the 18-month reconstruction, the timeline against the compromised operations, that was the work that cracked this open. Without that, I had a theory. With it, I had a case. He looked at her. Something in him straightened slightly. Not pride, something more earned than pride. It wasn't enough on its own. Nothing ever is, she said. That's the point. He nodded. Across the room, Mitchell finally moved. He stood from his chair and walked toward the door at a pace that was slightly too controlled to be casual. He stopped next to Emily on his way out. I need some air, he said. Take it, she said. He left. She let him go because some things needed to be processed alone. And Mitchell was a man who had just had 3 years of trust restructured around a new fact, and that was not a thing that happened quickly or without cost. And she respected his need to be somewhere quiet with it for a while. The room was emptying. Caldwell came to stand beside her. Federal team at 1400, he said again quieter. Not for the room, for her. I'll be ready, she said. There's one more thing, he said. He reached into his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. He held it for a moment, then handed it to her. This arrived at 0600 before any of this morning happened, before Mitchell's call. She looked at the envelope, her name on the outside. No return address, military courier seal. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet. On it, 2 lines. The first line was a set of coordinates she recognized immediately, a location in a country whose name she still was not permitted to say out loud. The second line was 4 words. She stared at them. Carter, Caldwell said. What does it say? She folded the sheet, put it in her jacket next to the maps and the torn pages and the accumulated evidence of the last 4 days. Looked at the general. It says the job isn't finished, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Is it ever, he said. She didn't answer that, because the answer was something she had been living for 4 years, and it was not something she could put into a sentence that would mean the same thing to someone who hadn't lived it. She looked at the door. She thought about coordinates. She thought about a weapon that had been built for one person and one person alone. She thought about this case she had just closed, and the one that had just opened the way they always opened, without ceremony, without preparation, in the quiet space between one impossible thing being finished and the next one beginning. The briefing room was empty now except for her and the general. He said her name quietly. Carter. She looked at him. Whatever those coordinates mean, he said, whatever comes next. He paused. I'm glad you were here. She held his gaze. So am I, she said. And for the first time since she had driven through the gates of Redstone with her sun-bleachered truck and her canvas bag and her worn boots, she meant it completely and without reservation. Because something had been finished here, and something else was waiting, and she was exactly the right person for both. Part 5, Commander Phantom. The federal team arrived at 13:58, 2 minutes ahead of schedule, which told Emily everything she needed to know about how seriously they were taking this. 3 vehicles, 6 agents, a lead officer named Reyes, who moved through the Redstone entrance with the particular efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a long time and was not going to waste a second of it now that it had arrived. He was compact, precise, and had the kind of face that gave nothing away as standard operating procedure rather than effort. Emily met him at the gate. He looked at her for exactly 1 second before extending his hand. Captain Carter. Agent Reyes. You made this faster than we expected, he said. Not a compliment. A statement of fact delivered the way people in his line of work delivered things as information without decoration. I had help, she said. He fell into step beside her. Gaines is in custody. Military police holding. Your team has jurisdiction from here. Doyle. Secured in his office with an escort. He's prepared to give a full statement. He believed he was operating inside an authorized intelligence exercise. Reyes made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Gaines told him that. Yes, Gaines told a lot of people things that were close enough to the truth to be believed, Reyes said. That's what made him difficult to pin down from the outside. Everything he did had a legitimate surface. The access patterns, the credentials, the information transfers, All of it could have been read as standard administrative work by someone who wasn't specifically looking for the deviation. But your team was looking. We were looking, he said, for 14 months, and we were close. But close and counterintelligence work without enough evidence to move is the most dangerous position you can be in, because the subject knows the walls are tightening even when they can't see you. She looked at him. He knew you were watching. We believe so. Yes. He paused. Which is part of why your arrival here accelerated things. You introduced a variable he hadn't planned for. Someone with the skill set and clearance level to find the thing from the inside that we'd been trying to find from the outside. He glanced at her. General Caldwell didn't tell us he was bringing you in. No, she said. I don't think he told many people. Smart, Reyes said. It's why it worked. They reached the entrance to the main building. He stopped, looked at her directly. The envelope, he said, that arrived this morning. She went still. You know about the envelope? We sent it. She looked at him, reread the last 12 hours through that new lens. The coordinates she recognized. The 4 words, the courier seal. You sent it before you knew how this morning would go. We sent it because we knew how this morning would go, he said. Carter, we've been watching you since you arrived, not your investigation, you, because the coordinates in that envelope are connected to the original source of the operation Gaines was feeding. She felt something cold move through her that was not quite surprise and not quite dread. Something in between. The operation Gaines was supporting, it didn't originate here. No, it originated at the location in those coordinates. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Then what I finished here today is the domestic end of something that has a foreign component, still active, he said. Yes, he held her gaze. We're not asking you to take that assignment, Captain. We're informing you that it exists and that you're the person most qualified to work it based on your history with that region. The decision is yours. She stood at the entrance to the building with the Arizona heat pressing down on everything and the federal team moving efficiently around her and the sound of Redstone carrying on its ordinary military morning underneath the entirely non-ordinary thing that was happening inside it. Give me until end of day, she said. He nodded. We'll be here. He went inside. She stood for a moment alone in the heat. Then she went to find Mitchell. Mini climax 6 minutes. He was exactly where she thought he'd be. At the range. Alone. Not shooting. Standing at the line with his arms at his sides and his eyes on the 600-meter mark and his mind somewhere she couldn't see. She walked up beside him and stood in the same direction he was facing and said nothing for a moment. They stood together in the particular companionship of 2 people who don't need to fill silence to be present in it. Federal team is here, she said. I saw them come in. Reyes is good. He'll run the interviews cleanly. Mitchell nodded. He didn't take his eyes off the 600-meter mark. I've been standing here thinking about the first time I saw Gaines run a debrief, he said. My first month at Redstone. He had this way of pulling information out of people without them noticing he was doing it. I thought it was a communication skill. I thought it was something I could learn. He paused. I spent 6 months studying how he did it. She said nothing. I got good at it, he said, and I never once thought about where he had learned it. You couldn't have known, she said. No, he agreed, but I should have wondered. He finally turned to look at her. That's the thing, isn't it? I stopped wondering about people I'd decided I trusted. I stopped asking questions because asking questions felt like a kind of disloyalty. He shook his head. That's exactly what someone like him needs from the people around him. He needs you to stop asking. Yes, she said. How do you not do that, he asked. It wasn't rhetorical. It was a real question from someone who wanted a real answer. How do you stay in a place where you trust people enough to work with them, but you don't stop asking? She thought about it honestly. You trust the behavior, not the story, she said. What someone does over time under pressure when there's something to lose. Not what they say about themselves. Not the version they present. She paused. And you accept that trust is a risk. That every time you extend it, you're accepting the possibility of being wrong. The goal isn't to never be wrong. The goal is to catch it before the cost becomes something you can't recover from. He looked at her. Did you trust Gaines at any point? Almost, she said. I was close to telling him more than I did. Something stopped me. What? I was always exactly as helpful as I needed him to be, she said. Right on the edge of what I required, every time. She paused. Real people are inconsistent. They give you too much sometimes and not enough other times. He was calibrated. She looked at the range. That's what I felt. Not a red flag, just an absence of the normal irregularity of a genuine person. Mitchell was quiet for a while. Carter, the envelope this morning, Caldwell told me a federal team sent it. He didn't tell me what it said. No, she said. Are you leaving? She didn't answer immediately. He looked at her. There's something still active, she said, connected to what Gaines was feeding into. The domestic operation ends here. The source of it doesn't. He absorbed that. Connected to the region you came from. Yes. The missions nobody talks about. Yes. He turned back toward the range. Then you already know what your answer is going to be. She said nothing. Carter. He said her name with a directness that had no performance in it. I've been on this range for 3 years. In that time, I've watched a lot of people come through Redstone, and I've built a pretty complete picture of what serious looks like. What it means to be the kind of person who does what other people can't. He paused. You're the only person I've met here who makes me feel like I've been practicing for something without knowing what it is. He turned to her. I want to be the kind of soldier you'd trust to have on your left. She looked at him. You're already that, she said. He held her gaze. Then come back, he said. When it's done, come back and finish what you started here. She looked at the range for a moment, at the target, at 600 meters of open ground and the heat moving above it. I'll do my best, she said. It was the most honest thing she could offer. He accepted it. Audience retention hook 14 minutes. Cole was waiting for her outside the supply station, not blocking her path, just standing nearby with his arms at his sides in the look of a man who has decided to do something uncomfortable and is not going to feel better about it by delaying. She stopped when she saw him. He said, I owe you something. She waited. When you came in that first morning, he said, I made a decision about who you were before I'd given you 30 seconds. And then I made it loud, in front of people. He looked at her directly, something in his face that was unfamiliar to it, an openness that his habitual authority usually covered. I've been running that station for 6 years. I know the protocols. I know the inventory. I know how things are supposed to work. He paused. What I apparently didn't know was how the people around me were actually working. He stopped, started again. You figured out in 4 days what I missed for 14 months. And the first thing I did when you arrived was throw your paperwork on the floor. She held his gaze. Cole, she said, you ran your inquiry through proper channels. You used legitimate authority to ask a legitimate question. Someone used that against you. That's not your failure. It's not my best hour either, he said. No, she agreed. It's not. He blinked. He'd been expecting more grace than that. The honest agreement surprised him. She said, the best hour was when I asked you whether Doyle had suggested the inquiry to you, and instead of getting defensive, you told me the truth. That was the moment that mattered, not the first morning. He stood with that for a moment. The black Talon, he said. She looked at him. It's real, he said. Not a question. A recalibration stated out loud so he could hear it. Yes, she said. And you've used it? Yes. He nodded slowly. I'd like to understand what I'm supposed to do when someone walks up to my counter and asks for something I don't have a category for, he said. What's the right call? Ask questions before you make assumptions, she said. And when the paperwork goes somewhere you can't follow, that's information, not an insult. He thought about it. That's harder than it sounds. Most things worth doing are, she said. He reached out his hand. She shook it. He nodded once, went back into the station. She watched him go and thought that sometimes the people who cause the most friction at the start are the ones who, once they've adjusted, hold the steadiest course. She had seen it before. She hoped Redstone would hold on to him. Minnie climaxed 18 minutes. Eris found her at 1500 hours in the planning room, which was fitting because the planning room was where most of the important things between them had happened. He knocked, even though the door was open, which was something she had noticed. He always did a small, consistent courtesy that spoke to how he had been raised before the military got to him. Agent Reyes interviewed me, he said. How did it go? He asked very precise questions. He sat across from her. He knew about the log reconstruction. He knew about the 18-month timeline. He said it was the cleanest piece of internal analysis he'd seen from a non-investigative officer. He paused. He asked where I learned it. What did you tell him? I told him I learned to look for patterns after we lost the 3 people on deployment. He looked at the table. And then I kept learning because someone I trusted told me to check my own file every morning. He looked up, which I now understand was Gaines managing me. He underestimated what you'd do with the habit, she said. He gave me a tool he thought was pointed inward, Ayers said. I pointed it everywhere. She nodded. He looked at her. Reyes asked if I'd be interested in a different kind of work. He didn't specify what, he just said that the kind of analytical pattern work I'd done on the log reconstruction was applicable to operations that go beyond standard military function. She studied him. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. He paused. I wanted to ask you first. She tilted her head slightly. Why me? Because you're the only person in the last week who treated what I did as genuinely useful and not just procedurally correct. He leaned forward slightly. There's a difference between being told you followed the right steps and being told the work mattered. You told me it mattered. She looked at him for a moment. It did. So should I say yes to Reyes? She thought about what she knew of the federal unit, about Reyes specifically, about the kind of work that lived at the intersection of analytical intelligence and operational reality. You'd be good at it, she said. You have the instinct for it, and you've already demonstrated the discipline. The work is harder than it looks from the outside and lonelier than you'd expect. She paused. But if you're the kind of person who has to understand how things actually work, rather than how they're supposed to work, it's the right direction. He nodded slowly. Are you the kind of person who has to understand how things actually work? Yes, she said. Is that why you do what you do? She looked at the terrain maps still spread across the table, at the pencil marks on the elevation lines, at the crease from too many foldings. Partly, she said, partly it's because there are things that need doing that other people can't do. And once you know you're one of the people who can, the question of whether you want to becomes less relevant. He sat with that. That sounds lonely. Sometimes, she said honestly. He looked at her. Something moved in his expression that was not pity, which she would not have welcomed, but a kind of recognition. The recognition of someone who has begun to understand a category of person they hadn't previously had a name for. Will you tell Reyes? I said yes, he said. Tell him yourself, she said. Own it. He stood, almost left, turned back. Carter, whatever comes next for you. He stopped, tried again. I'm glad I got to see it, what you did here, from the inside. She looked at him. So am I, she said. He left. She sat alone in the planning room for a few minutes and let it be quiet. Major twist, 26 minutes. At 16:30, she went to see Gaines. The military police holding room was a plain space with a plain table and the kind of chair that communicates institutional indifference without trying. He was sitting in it with his hands folded and the look of a man who has finished the phase of processing, where you hope the situation is different than it is and has arrived at the phase where you simply exist inside it. He looked up when she came in. The military police escort stayed outside the door. She sat across from him. He said, You didn't have to come. No, she said, I didn't. Then why? She put her hands on the table, looked at him directly. Because I want to understand something, and I think you're the only person who can tell me. He waited. 14 months, she said. You're a careful man. You're methodical. You think about consequences before you act. I've seen that in every interaction we've had. She paused, which means you understood what you were doing, not just tactically, in terms of what it meant. He was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that has weight in it, not silence. Presence. Yes, he said. Then tell me how it starts, she said, because I have read the behavioral profile on this type of operation many times. I know how the approach usually works. Small requests, plausible framing, gradual escalation. But I want to hear how it started for you specifically. He looked at his folded hands. It started with a question, he said, from someone I'd known for years, someone I trusted, a question about whether certain training data had value beyond the base, whether the readiness assessments we produced here were used at the levels above us or whether they just went into files and disappeared. He paused. It seemed like a genuine question about institutional effectiveness. And your answer? I said I thought the data was underutilized. that the assessments were more detailed than what the command structure actually read. He paused, and he agreed, and the conversation moved from there, slowly, over months. He looked up. There was never a moment where someone put something in front of me and said, do this, pass this along, betray the people you've worked with. It was a series of small steps, each of which was only slightly beyond the last one. By the time I understood where I was, I had already done enough that stopping felt. He stopped. Impossible, she said. Like the cost of stopping was higher than the cost of continuing, he said, which is a lie you tell yourself. But it's a very effective lie. She looked at him. Who was the person who started the conversation? He met her eyes. I already told Reyes. I know, I'm asking because I want to hear it from you. He said the name. She wrote nothing down. She kept it in the map in her head, next to the coordinates from the envelope, next to the 4 words on the single sheet of paper still in her jacket pocket. The name connected to the coordinates. She had suspected it. Now she knew it. She stood up. Carter, he said. She stopped. The morning you came in, he said. When Cole laughed, when the whole room laughed. He looked at her. I didn't. I don't know if you noticed. She thought back to that morning. The supply room. The laughter. She had been reading the room with her full attention. She had noticed. I noticed, she said. He looked at the table. I don't know what that's worth at this point. Not much, she said. It was honest, not cruel. He received it as both. She moved to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. Gains, the soldiers you put at risk, the operations that encountered resistance they shouldn't have had, whatever happens in the federal process. Whatever the outcome, those are the things we're sitting with. He didn't answer. She left him sitting with them. Audience retention hook 32 minutes. She went to the general at 1700. He was at his desk with the day's accumulated documentation and the look of a man who had done something necessary and was living in the complicated aftermath of it. He looked up when she came in. Reyes briefed me, he said, the foreign component. Yes, sir. The name Gaines gave him. It's connected to the coordinates in your envelope. Yes, he leaned back. You're going. Yes, sir. He nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't question. He had brought her here knowing that what she did had a direction and that the direction sometimes led away from the place you were standing. When Reyes wants to move fast, the domestic operation closing will send a signal. Anyone connected to the foreign component will know the clock is running. How much time do you have? I need to be in the air by 0600 tomorrow. He looked at her. That doesn't give you much time here. No, she said. It doesn't. Is there anything you need from me before you go? She sat down across from him, which she rarely did. She usually stood. He noticed the difference. I want to debrief you fully, she said. Everything I found here, the complete map, not the summary, the actual structure of how it was built and how it was sustained. She paused. Because if something like this happened here with someone who had your trust for 8 years, it can happen at other bases with other people. And the pattern of how it builds is the thing that makes it catchable early. He looked at her for a moment. You want me to be able to teach this? I want this base to be the last time something like this runs for 14 months without being caught, she said. That's the outcome that matters? He was quiet for a long time. All right, he said. Talk me through it. She talked him through it for 90 minutes. Every detail, every access pattern, every behavioral marker. The calibration she'd felt in Gaines, the thumb movement she'd seen in Doyle, the way the anonymous call had changed the geometry. She gave him everything, held nothing back for operational security because there was nothing left here that needed protecting in that way. The operation was closed. What remained was the knowledge, and the knowledge needed to live in more than one mind. He listened without interrupting. He asked 3 questions, all of them precise, all of them showing that he was building the same kind of map she was describing. When she finished, he sat for a moment in the weight of it. Carter, he said, if you need anything, from me, from this base, from whatever I can reach in the network above us. He paused. The door is open. Thank you, sir, she said. She stood. One more thing, he said. She looked at him. He opened his desk drawer. He put something on the desk between them. She looked at it. A case. Long, slim, matte black. No visible markings. She looked at him. It arrived at 0700 this morning, he said. Same courier as the envelope. with a note that said it should be returned to its operator before she leaves the country. She reached out, opened the case. The black Talon lay inside in its faded housing exactly as she had last seen it 3 years ago in a country she still was not permitted to name. Every line of it was familiar, every surface. The weight of it when she lifted it was the particular weight that had been calibrated specifically to the measurements of her hands. She held it for a moment. She set it back in the case, looked at Caldwell. "They knew I was coming before you requested my transfer," she said. "Yes," he said. "They sent you the request." He held her gaze. "The request came from above me. I was informed that a specialist was needed. I was given a name. I was not told it had originated from further up." She absorbed this, which means the mission here was the preparation, not the objective. "That's my read," he said. She looked at the case, at the weapon that had been built for her, that had been returned to her now as she stood at the threshold of what came next. "They built the whole thing," she said. "Quiet, not angry, processing. The transfer, the arrival, Cole's reaction, the range scores going on the board, all of it designed to flush out whatever was at Redstone by introducing a variable that would force movement." "And it worked," Caldwell said. "It worked," she agreed. She picked up the case. She looked at the general. "Sir," she said, "it has been an honor." He stood, extended his hand. She shook it. He held it for a moment longer than a formal handshake required. "Come back, Carter." "Do my best," she said. She walked out of his office with the black Talon in her hand and the coordinates in her jacket and the name Gaines had given her running alongside everything else in the operational map that was already building in her mind for what came next. Mini climax 42 minutes. She was packing her camera bag when she heard the knock. Not at the door, on the door frame because the door itself was open. She turned. Holloway. He stood in the frame with none of the easy bravado she had seen in him on the first day. He looked younger without it, and older at the same time the way people look when something has moved through them and left a different arrangement. "I heard you're leaving," he said. "Tomorrow morning," she said. He nodded. He looked at the bag, at the case beside it, then at her. "I wanted to say something. I've been trying to figure out how to say it since yesterday." She waited. "The thing I said about your scores," he said, "that someone adjusted to them, that it was manipulation." He stopped. "I said it because it was the only explanation I had that fit my picture of how things work, which was a picture where I was near the top of what was possible here." He paused. "That picture was wrong." "You couldn't have known that before the range," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I didn't ask questions either. I just decided." He looked at her. "And then you came to the recreation room and you offered to go back out there and shoot the course again right then with me watching. And I realized that someone who is cheating doesn't make that offer. Someone who knows exactly what they can do makes that offer." She said nothing. "I want to learn," he said, "not just the shooting, the way you think about it, the way you think about everything. The way you walked into this place and in 4 days understood it better than people who've been here for years." He paused. "I want to know how to do that." She looked at him, at the 22-year-old who had laughed with the room on the first morning and who was standing in her doorway now with something genuine and uncomfortable on his face. "You already have the instinct," she said. "You read people fast. You made a judgment about me in 30 seconds. The judgment was wrong, but the speed was real. That's the raw material." She paused. "The discipline is learning to hold the judgment longer before you commit to it, to stay in the question instead of rushing to the answer." She looked at him steadily. "The question is always more useful than the answer. The answer closes things. The question keeps them open." He absorbed this. "How do you learn that?" "The hard way," she said, "which is the only way." He nodded. "Then will you come back?" She picked up her bag. "Can't promise that. But it's possible." She looked at him. "Most things are possible," she said. "That's the first thing worth knowing." He stepped back from the door. She walked past him into the corridor. He called after her, "Captain Carter." She stopped. "The black Talon," he said. "It's real." "Yes," she said. "I'm going to remember that," he said. "Every time I think I know what's possible. I'm going to remember that." She held his gaze for a moment. "Good," she said. She walked down the corridor. Final climax 48 minutes. She left Redstone at 05:45, 25 minutes before she told anyone she was leaving. Old habit. The gap between when people expect you to move and when you actually move is one of the few advantages you can build without resources. She drove out through the same gate she'd come in through 6 days ago. The same guard post. A different guard, a young woman who checked her credentials with the particular alertness of someone 3 hours into a 6-hour shift who is making herself stay sharp. The woman looked at the credentials, looked at the case in the back seat, looked at Emily. "Safe travels, Captain," she said. "Thank you," Emily said. She drove through. In the mirror, she watched Redstone recede. The gates, the main building, the range she could see the top of. From this angle, the range where the score was still on the board with her name next to it, 4 points above Mitchell's best day. She turned her eyes forward. The road ahead was straight and empty, and the Arizona sky was just beginning to consider the possibility of morning that particular deep blue that exists for 20 minutes before the sun commits. She had the coordinates memorized. She had the name Gaines had given Reyes memorized. She had the 4 words from the envelope in her jacket folded against her chest. The 4 words were, "They're waiting for you." She had read them in the briefing room with the general watching her face, and she had felt the particular sensation of a thing that had been suspended finally falling into place. Not a trap, not a summons, a recognition. The people at those coordinates knew she was coming, the same way they had arranged for her to be sent to Redstone, the same way the Black Talon had been waiting in its case, and Reyes had been waiting at the gate. Everything had been pointed in a direction from the start, and the direction was forward, always forward, toward the thing that could not be finished by anyone else because no one else had been where she had been, or seen what she had seen, or survived what she had survived in the country whose name she still could not say out loud. Her phone buzzed. "Mitchell," she answered on speaker. "I told you 0600, she said. "I know," he said. "I wanted to catch you before the gate." A pause. "I missed you." 15 minutes, she said. "Close enough." His voice had the range steadiness in it, the controlled quality he used when he was holding something. "The score is still on the board. I told Briggs to leave it." "You should update it," she said. "When someone beats it." "When someone beats it," he said. It was not an agreement. It was an acknowledgement that the sentence contained something he didn't expect to be true for a long time. "Mitchell," she said. "Yeah." "Watch Holloway," she said. "He has the instinct. He just needs someone to keep the question open for him instead of letting him close everything too fast." A pause. "I can do that." "And Ayers, if Reyes brings him into the federal unit, let him go. Don't hold on to him for the base. He'll do more good in that direction." "Already decided," Mitchell said. "I told him this morning." She smiled. The road was long and straight, and the blue above it was shifting toward the first edge of gold. "You're going to be fine, Mitchell." "I know," he said. "That's not what I'm worried about." She drove. "Carter," he said, "the Black Talon, you have it." "Yes." "Then whoever is at those coordinates doesn't know yet what's coming." She thought about the coordinates, about the name, about 14 months of information that had moved in one direction and was about to stop. About the operations that had encountered resistance they shouldn't have had. About the 3 forward operations and what that meant in human terms that she had not let herself think about too specifically and would now on this road let herself think about once fully so that she carried the weight of it properly into what came next. "No," she said, "they don't." "Good," he said. "Goodbye, Mitchell." "Come back, Carter." She hung up. The road was empty and the sky was breaking open above it, and she drove straight into the light with the Black Talon in its case in the back seat and the coordinates in her memory and the certain knowledge of a woman who had spent 4 years doing impossible things, that the next impossible thing was already waiting, and that she was, as she had always been, exactly the right person for it. Nobody had given her that certainty. Nobody had handed it to her in a ceremony, or written it on a board, or confirmed it in an official document. She had built it herself, in conditions nobody knew about, through decisions that cost her things she would not name. Over years of being the person in the room that everyone looked past the woman in the worn boots with the canvas bag who asked for the weapon nobody believed in. The weapon that was real, the woman who was real. The record on the board that said 4 points above the best anyone at Redstone had ever managed, and the board itself that would eventually be replaced, and the record that would eventually be broken by someone she would never meet. And the fact that none of that was the point. The point was the 600 meters. The point was the stillness. The point was knowing what had to happen and making it happen. Not because anyone was watching, not because anyone would write it down, but because it needed doing, and she was the one who could do it. She had always known this about herself. The world was only now catching up, and somewhere at a set of coordinates in a country she would not name, the last piece of what she had started years ago was waiting for the only person who could finish it. She pressed the accelerator. The road opened ahead of her like a sentence finally reaching its end. She drove forward into it without hesitation, without looking back, carrying everything she was toward everything that still needed to be done, because that was what she had always been, and that was what she would always be. And no amount of laughter in a supply room, or doubt in a briefing, or 14 months of quiet damage done in the dark could change the simple, irreducible truth of what Emily Carter was capable of when she decided